For centuries, the man who prefers his own company has been a source of suspicion. We reduce him to a convenient label: the weirdo, the antisocial one, the guy who just didn't work out with people. But have we ever stopped to consider this man as he really is? A man with concrete reasons, with a perception most people never reach, and with a very specific goal. A man who didn't run away from life, but saw something in it that others refuse to see. Have we ever asked ourselves why he chooses silence while everyone else begs for noise? Why does his solitude bother those who live surrounded by people so much? And what exactly did he find in there? A German philosopher put these pieces together 2 centuries ago and arrived at a disturbing answer. It's not about solitude. It's about who really runs your mind. And this story begins at one exact point: the day you came to believe that you were the one doing the thinking. Before talking about this man who loves being alone, I need to talk about you. More precisely, about the story you tell yourself every day without realizing it. The story goes something like this: I think, I evaluate, I decide. My life is the result of my rational choices. It seems obvious. It even seems insulting to doubt it. But take an honest look at any random scene from your week. That impulse purchase you made, thumb scrolling across the screen at 11 at night, your face lit up by the cold glow of your phone. The next day, you explained that purchase with perfect arguments. It was on sale. I needed it. I deserve it. The explanation came afterward. The decision had already been made by something else, somewhere else, long before your reason clocked in for its shift. It happens with anger too. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and within half a second your entire body is already at war. Only afterward does your mind assemble the speech, the trial, the verdict proving that your fury was justified and necessary. I know this is hard to hear, but reason, most of the time, arrives late. It doesn't decide. It signs off on what was already decided in the dark. And if that's true, an uncomfortable question opens up. If reason isn't in charge, then who is? Hold on to that question, because the answer will explain why the solitary man thrives, while the man surrounded by people lives exhausted. The one who answered that question with almost brutal courage was Arthur Schopenhauer. He was born in 1788, lived most of his life alone in Frankfurt, in the company of a dog, and wrote against everything the philosophy of his era considered sacred. Because, you see, all of Western thought had built a throne for reason. From Plato to Hegel, the message was the same. Man is a rational animal, and reason is the light that governs the soul. Schopenhauer looked at this 2,000-year-old cathedral and said, in no uncertain terms, that it was upside down. In 1818, he published his life's work, The World as Will and Representation. And in it, he claimed the exact opposite of the tradition. Man is not a rational being who sometimes desires. Man is a desiring being who sometimes reasons. Feel the weight of that inversion. It's not some technical detail for philosophers. It's an earthquake in the image you have of yourself. Because if Schopenhauer is right, that thinking self you believe to be the captain of the ship is, in fact, an employee. A competent employee, articulate, loaded with degrees, but an employee. And the boss works on a floor that consciousness cannot reach. That boss has a name. Schopenhauer called it the will. And here it's worth slowing down, because the word is deceiving. It's not will in the sense of willpower, that thing you try to use to wake up early. The will, for him, is the fundamental drive that runs through everything that exists. It's a blind force, faceless, planless, and restless, that simply wants. The plant twisting itself toward the light doesn't think, but it wants. The animal that hunts doesn't philosophize, but it wants. And man, who thinks he's so different, is that same force wearing a suit and carrying justifications. The will doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't say thank you when it receives. It's never satisfied when it succeeds. It just pushes, always forward, always toward the next object. You feel the will operating every single day. You just didn't know its name. It's what makes your hand grab your phone before your mind decides to grab it. It's what turns yesterday's satisfied desire into today's boredom and tomorrow's hunger. It's what whispers that the next achievement, this time for sure, will bring peace. And here comes the most unsettling piece of the puzzle, the one that changes how you see every argument you've ever won in your life. The intellect, Schopenhauer said, is not the judge of the courtroom. It's the lawyer. Think about what a lawyer does. He doesn't decide what the client wants. The client shows up with the desire already formed, and the lawyer builds the best possible defense for that desire. Your reason works exactly like that. No one has ever fallen in love through logical deduction. No one has ever desired a house, a body, or a job title after putting together a spreadsheet of arguments. First comes the wanting, rising from the depths like a warm current. Then comes the mind, elegant, organizing the reasons why that wanting is sensible, fair, inevitable. You don't choose what you desire. You discover what you desire, and then you hire your own intelligence to argue the case. I'm not saying this to make you anxious, but to wake you up, because this discovery, as uncomfortable as it is the key to everything that comes next. And it's so powerful that it founded an entire science. Almost a century before the word unconscious became a therapist's office staple, Schopenhauer had already mapped the territory, the hidden force commanding from beneath consciousness, the desire that disguises itself, the mind that hides from itself what it cannot bear to see. When Sigmund Freud built psychoanalysis, he acknowledged that the philosopher had gotten there first, anticipating central ideas about the role of desire and the processes consciousness cannot see. And Carl Gustav Jung, who devoured Schopenhauer in his youth, recorded in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, the decisive impact that reading had on his formation. Depth psychology, the kind that fills books and therapy sessions today, was born from the pen of a man who spent his afternoons alone, walking with his dog. Do you see the pattern starting to form? The thinker who saw deepest into the human mind was, himself, a man of solitude. That is not a coincidence. And in a moment, you'll understand why solitude was the laboratory where this vision became possible, and why it remains the only laboratory available to anyone who truly wants to know themselves. But first, one piece is still missing, because the will explains what moves you, but it still doesn't explain the world you see. And the first sentence of The World as Will and Representation is perhaps the most vertiginous in modern philosophy. The world is my representation. Schopenhauer inherited this road from Immanuel Kant and took it all the way to the end. The idea is this: you have never had direct access to reality. Never. What you call the world is a construction your mind manufactures every second, using its own filters, its own lenses, its own wounds. Light enters through your eyes. Your brain assembles the scene, and you live inside that assembly, believing it is the world itself. It isn't. It's your version of it. Notice how this works on an ordinary day. The credit card bill arrives by email. For one man, that number is just a number, one task among others, handled in 2 minutes. For another, the same number triggers an entire movie of failure, comparison, and shame, and ruins the rest of his night. The email was identical. The experience was not. The rain that cancels the outing is relief for one person and tragedy for another. The same boss, with the same words, is a challenge for one employee and a humiliation for the colleague at the next desk. In none of these cases did the world change. What changes, always, is the mind that receives the world and turns it into experience. This sounds abstract until you land in real life with even more weight. Two brothers grow up in the same house, eat the same food, hear the same fights behind the same thin wall. One grows up and describes that childhood as a training ground that made him stronger. The other describes the same childhood as the wound that explains all of his failures. Which one is lying? Neither. Each one lives inside his own representation. The event was one. The worlds generated by it were two. And that is why Schopenhauer, in his aphorisms on the wisdom of life, nailed down a hierarchy that the entire marketplace tries to hide from you. What a man is weighs infinitely more than what he has or what he represents in the eyes of others. Because everything he has and everything he appears to be passes first through the filter of what he is. A bitter consciousness turns any paradise into a pocket-sized hell. A rich consciousness finds abundance in a simple room. Now the pieces fit together and the picture becomes visible. If the will commands from below, and if each person lives in their own representation, then you can predict with mathematical precision how the mental life of most people works. Schopenhauer predicted it, and he gave that prediction the shape of a pendulum. It works like this. You desire something you don't have. The distance between you and the object hurts. That pain has many names in the modern vocabulary. Anxiety, dissatisfaction, that feeling of always being late for a life happening somewhere else. So you fight, you reach the object, and for a few days the world shines. The new car still smells like plastic. The new relationship still has butterflies. The promotion still impresses the relatives. And then, without warning, the shine evaporates. The conquered object becomes scenery, and in place of the pain of desiring, something settles in that might be even worse. Boredom. A shapeless emptiness that doesn't hurt like a wound, but weighs like fog, until a new desire lights up on the horizon, and the pendulum swings again. The pain of wanting. Brief relief. Boredom. The pain of wanting all over again. The life of the ordinary mind is that wall clock swinging between two forms of suffering, and the promised happiness is always the next station. The cruel detail is that the train never stops at any station. Want to see the pendulum in slow motion? Think back to the last big purchase of your life. Before it, there were weeks of desire. You researched, compared, imagined. The object took up an enormous space in your head, glowing like a promise. Then the day came. You paid, took it home, and for a while everything made sense. Now answer honestly. How long did it last? 2 weeks? 10 days? At some point, without ceremony, that object you would have fought for became part of the furniture, invisible, and your attention, without you giving the order, was already sniffing out the next target. No one taught you to do that. No one had to. It's the mechanism running on its own, silent as a well-oiled engine. You recognize this pendulum everywhere. It's in the purchase history that didn't change you. It's in the string of goals you hit that never brought the rest they promised. It's in that Sunday afternoon when everything is handled, nothing is missing, and yet a restlessness climbs up your chest without asking permission. I completely understand when you feel that and conclude the problem is you. It isn't. The problem is the structure of desire itself, working exactly as it was designed to work. And this is where boredom reveals its secret. For Schopenhauer, boredom is not some minor problem of an empty schedule. It's a confession. Think about it. If happiness really were in things, then the man who obtained all the things should be the happiest of men. But look at what happens to those who make it to the top. The distractions get more expensive, more frequent, more desperate. The calendar fills up with commitments that exist so that not a single minute of silence is left over. Because in silence, when nothing is missing and no urgency comes to the rescue, a man comes face to face with his own consciousness. And if that consciousness is an empty room, the encounter is unbearable. The boredom of those who have everything is the final proof that the problem was never in the list of acquisitions. It was always in the structure of the one acquiring. Maybe you've lived a smaller version of this. The long-awaited vacation arrives. In the first few days, the rest is delicious. Then, around day 4, a strange restlessness shows up. You start checking work messages for no reason. You invent tasks. You miss the very grind you swore you wanted to escape. What's happening there? The will ran out of targets. And a will without a target doesn't rest. It grinds. The rest you imagined wasn't the absence of movement. It was just the promise of a different movement. That's why so many people come back from vacation more tired than when they left. The body stopped. The wanting didn't. And until the wanting finds another relationship with silence, no destination on the map will deliver the peace the advertising promised. It's exactly at this point that the solitary man from the beginning of the video comes back into the scene. Remember him? The one the world reduced to a convenient label. Now you have the tools to understand what he understood. And what he understood lies in the sharpest division in the aphorisms. Schopenhauer separates men by their inner wealth. On one side, the poor mind. Not poor in money, poor in content of its own. This mind produces nothing on its own, so it needs to import stimulation all the time. It needs people talking around it. It needs a screen turned on. It needs parties, gossip, novelty, anything that muffles the echo of its own emptiness. For this mind, solitude is a torture chamber, because being alone means being locked in an unfurnished room with the most boring person it knows. You've seen this poor mind operating up close, maybe even in the mirror. It's the person who can't eat lunch without a screen on in front of their plate, who gets in the car, and the first thing they do is turn on any sound, any voice, anything to fill the air, who feels a physical discomfort when the elevator takes too long and there's nothing to look at except their own reflection in the metal door. It's not laziness. It's not a character flaw. It's a consciousness that never built anything inside itself, and therefore treats every second of silence as a threat. The entire market dynamic of modern entertainment was built on top of this fragility. There is a structural logic that profits from every minute you can't stand your own company. Think about that the next time you notice your hand reaching for your pocket for no reason at all. On the other side, there is the cultivated mind. This one carries its own springs within itself. Ideas that converse with each other, imagination that builds worlds, organized memories, digested readings, questions that fill entire afternoons. For this mind, solitude is not punishment. It's a feast. The inwardly rich man comes home, closes the door, and isn't left with less. He's left with more, because the best of his company lives on the inside. Schopenhauer sums it up in one definitive image. The compulsive sociability of men is born, deep down, from their inability to endure themselves. They don't gather because they love each other. They gather because running away together is less embarrassing than running away alone. That's why the man who loves being alone is not lost. He walked away from a game that was already lost. While most people beg for stimulation door to door, he discovered he owned a pantry. And the question that remains is inevitable. How do you build that pantry? How does a mind escape inner poverty and grow rich? Schopenhauer didn't leave the question hanging. He pointed to concrete paths. And the first one may be the most underrated experience of your life. Think of the last time a song caught you off guard. Not the background music at the grocery store. A song that cut right through you, that made time change texture, that left you standing in the middle of the room not knowing for how long. In that instant, something rare happened. You stopped wanting. No desire pulling you forward, no lack aching behind you. Just presence. Schopenhauer gave that a name, aesthetic contemplation. For him, art is the breach in the wall of the will. Before beauty, the hungry self goes quiet, and what remains is a pure observer, clean, at peace. And no art did this more powerfully than music, which he considered the direct expression of the will itself, speaking without intermediaries. That peace you feel in front of the ocean, inside a work of art, in the middle of a melody, is not distraction. It's the only true rest the mind knows. The solitary man knows this from experience. He doesn't stay alone to do nothing. He stays alone because that's where those breaches open up. The second path is more demanding and more transformative. Knowing the mechanism in order to weaken the mechanism. It works like this. The desire that drags you around in the dark is irresistible, precisely because it operates in the dark. You obey before you realize you were given an order. But the man who has studied his own will gains something precious. A gap. A tiny space between impulse and action. The desire rises, and instead of obeying on reflex, he can watch it rising. He can think, "This is the will wanting through me. It's not a sacred command. It's not my essence speaking. It's the mechanism doing its thing." That recognition alone changes everything. The desire doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority as emperor and becomes what it always was, an impulse, which can be acted on or not. Seeing the chain doesn't break the chain, but it's impossible to loosen a chain you don't even know you're carrying. A simple example makes this concrete. Imagine someone provokes you in a conversation. The urge to fire back rises, burning up your throat. The ordinary man has already answered before realizing he was going to answer, and then spends the night stewing over the damage. The man who knows his own mechanism feels the same urge, with the same force, but something different happens along the way. He notices the heat rising. He recognizes the signature of the will in that urgency. And in that half-second of recognition, the possibility of choosing opens up. Maybe he answers anyway. Maybe he stays silent. The point is not to get it right every time. The point is that, for the first time, there is a someone between the stimulus and the response. Before, there was no one there. There was only the mechanism, firing in the dark and calling the shot a decision. And that kind of vision demands exactly what the modern world sabotages the most: silence, uninterrupted time, distance from other people's noise. It demands, in a word, solitude. If you're enjoying this content, check out our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes, in the first comment. It goes deeper into this work of looking inward and recognizing the forces operating beneath your consciousness. The third path remains, and here I need to be honest with you, because Schopenhauer was honest to the very end. For him, the highest degree of liberation is not a productivity technique or a wellness trick. It's a profound ethical turn. It's called compassion, and it's born from an almost mystical perception. If the same single will runs through all beings, then another person's suffering is not a distant spectacle. It's the same force suffering in another body. The man who sees this stops seeing walls between himself and the rest of the world. Other people's pain begins to hurt in him, not out of sentimentality, but out of recognition. And at the most extreme point of this path, inspired by the Hindu and Buddhist wisdom he studied and admired his entire life, Schopenhauer describes the denial of the will, the exceedingly rare moment when the wanting, after seeing itself completely, turns against itself and falls silent. Few ever get there, and he knew it. But the direction matters more than the arrival. Every step down that road is a step out of the pendulum, and then the picture is complete. Look at it in full now. There is a blind force commanding from beneath your consciousness, and your reason works for it, like a devoted lawyer. The world you see is not the world. It's the version your mind manufactures, which means the quality of your life depends less on the facts and more on the consciousness that receives them. Left to itself, that consciousness lives trapped in a pendulum between the pain of wanting and the emptiness of getting. And the collective escape from that pendulum disguises itself as an intense social life, a packed schedule, non-stop noise. The man who loves being alone is the one who saw through the charade. He didn't run away from people. He stopped using people as anesthesia. And in the silence that remained, he began building the only wealth no crisis can seize. A mind that is good company for itself, that contemplates instead of devouring, that observes its own desire instead of obeying it in the dark. It's completely valid to feel a certain discomfort with all of this. Finding out you were never the captain of the ship is never pleasant news. But notice what Schopenhauer left in your hands. You didn't choose to have a will. No one did. It was there before you learned to speak, pushing, wanting, riding you like a horseman on a horse. The choice that exists is a different one, and it's open in front of you right now. Keep being just the horse, running wherever the spurs command, and calling that your own decision, or learn, little by little, in the silence that only solitude offers, to hold the reins as well. The man who loves being alone is not lost. He is exactly where that learning happens. He is not running from the world. He is, perhaps for the first time, no longer running from himself. If this video opened a door inside you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because that's what allows these reflections to reach more people who are ready to hear them. And if you want to go deeper on this journey, with exclusive content we don't publish here, join our members club.